My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses.
By sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic multiverses. Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
Da, tovarich.
Yes, today is the perfect time for us to talk only with Russian accent, yes.
I have two Russian accents. I've got the very deep. This is how we speak in Mother Russia. And then I have the Russian accent that is a little bit more nasally, but I have less trouble doing this one because I actually met a man who spoke like this.
Well, it is good. I'm somewhere in the middle because I don't know if I think I know one person who learned Russian for university, but that is about it. No, we will not subject everyone to Russian accents for the whole episode.
I was gearing up to actually do it, but may I also mention, it might not be a big thing for those who are listening, but we are in fact seeing each other because of video cameras being a thing, and you, Average Joe, look remarkably like Ewan McGregor today.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Perhaps
specifically as Obi-Wan Kenobi, episode 3.
Oh, that is peak Obi-Wan. I take that as a great compliment. Before we get started, we should give a shout out to friends of the show. What's his name? Professor F and Knit Stitch, who have both been on the show before, got married yesterday. And I got to be there in person for the ceremony. So they're on their honeymoon now. So if you guys know Professor F or Knit Stitch in real life, feel free to send them well wishes on their
But maybe
nuptials.
After the honeymoon.
Yes, don't talk to them now. They're busy. But all that being said, it is I feel like we should take credit somehow because there have been a number of marriages that have come as a result of this podcast. Like people
as a result, did they meet on the podcast?
No, they didn't. But I just want to take credit. Is that
all right? Fair enough. Well, it's like you taking credit for our future child being a podcast baby.
I do take credit for that. We will. It is a podcast baby.
Fair enough.
We had a week off, so hopefully everyone enjoyed it. My sentiment coming off of this week off is represented by a line the Joker says in the Batman Beyond movie, and I want to quote it, but I know what's better. Should I cringily do a Joker impression as I say it, or should I just say it in my normal voice?
Oh, absolutely! I want to hear your Mark Hamill Joker.
Okay, I'm 10. I'm rested. And I'm ready to give this old town a wedgie again.
Yeah. Hey, that was pretty good, actually.
I don't actually want to give everyone wedgies, but I do.
No, just the town.
Right, just the town. But yeah, it was odd actually, having it off, just because normally we take a few weeks off every year because of vacations and holidays and stuff. But since the pandemic started, there really haven't been opportunities to do that, and it's now as things are opening up we're actually able to do that more. So Beeper, I'm guessing you enjoyed your week off.
I mean, more or less. It was partially because of a holiday. We went to visit my grandmother-in-law, so it was a lot of traveling, but it was a good weekend, and I did enjoy it. I enjoyed other things that have happened since, though, as well, because as you mentioned, things are reopening. I actually went on a double date today and went to see a movie as part of it. It's pretty incredible feeling to be back to that.
Yes, I'm so excited. Movie theaters opened up in Ontario on Friday. I have tickets. I'm going with a friend to see Fast 9 on Tuesday. That's the kind of movie you got to see in a movie theater.
If you have to watch that movie, then yes.
What do you mean if you have to? I love
I
the
have yet
Fast.
to see any of the Fast and Furious movies.
Oh my goodness. I think you said you were seeing A Quiet Place too.
Yes, it lived up.
Well, I just found out it's now free on Amazon Prime Video, so
Oh, well. But you wouldn't watch it in a theater, and you won't get John Krasinski telling you or saying thank you to you for watching it in a room together with people, even though I think there were at most maybe 10 people in the entire movie theater, and our group was 4 of them, so.
well, it is a Sunday afternoon. This is not exactly the biggest movie time.
Correct.
But nonetheless, yes, things are looking good. Movie theaters are open. You know, I was at a gathering outdoors with people Saturday night for the wedding that I mentioned earlier, and it was probably the most people I'd been around in person since before the pandemic started. So, what better time to talk about a Marvel movie?
That was pushed back because of the pandemic. You know, it's all coming back.
Right. So, we should do some secret origin segmenting here. Bieber, how were you first introduced to the Black Widow character?
Oh, to the character of Black Widow. I think Avengers, actually. I think it would be when I watched the first Avengers movie with a few friends, and she was in it.
You'd never heard of the character before? You hadn't seen Iron Man 2?
I generally think I saw Avengers before I saw Iron Man 2, actually.
Is this love, Agent Romanoff?
Love is for children. I owe him a debt.
Tell me.
Before I worked for S.H.I.E.L.D., well, I made a name for myself. I have a very specific skill set. I didn't care who I used it for. Or on.
Interesting.
I'm not entirely certain, that could be inaccurate, but it was definitely from the movies, and I had not heard about Black Widow as a Marvel character. To be fair, my introduction to comics came kind of after high school, mostly. So I think the only Marvel comic I'd read at that point was Secret Wars.
Right. Well, no surprise to people who've been listening to the show for a long time. I was first introduced to Black Widow through animation because there was this movie that was released on DVD in 2006 called Ultimate Avengers, the movie. And Black Widow is one of the Avengers in that movie.
Would you like me to?
Let's start with your name.
Not here, in private.
Is this private enough?
Natalia. Romanoff.
As in the Black Widow?
You're a hard man to pin down, Tony.
Not really, given the proper motivation.
We'll get into her actual history a bit here in her Secret Origin segment, but because I'd never really seen anything Avengers related, I just assumed, oh, she must be part of the Avengers. But as it turns out, that was an adaptation of the Ultimate Comics version of the Avengers, which were just called the Ultimates. And in that version, she was like a founding Avenger. But that has never been the case in mainline comics. And now it's kind of interesting with the MCU being what it is, because for people like yourself, you probably just assumed Black Widow has always been an Avenger.
I mean, I know who the original Avengers are because I've seen the cover of that comic that's you have somewhere in your apartment with Loki and the Avengers, but I didn't. Yeah, I didn't know what the history was behind it. Although now looking back, I'm like, yeah, no, this doesn't make sense that she would be part of the original Avengers or even close to it, because she's not strictly a superhero. Like, less so even than Batman is. So, and the original Avengers were definitely all very superhero-ish. So it seems odd to have her included at the founding.
Would you be surprised if I told you that she was actually introduced as an Iron Man villain?
Not even remotely. I mean, she's Russian. How could she have not been a villain originally?
Well,
This is not a commentary on Russian people. It's a commentary on American people.
And the 1960s, because Black Widow made her first debut in Tales of Suspense issue 52, which people who don't know, Tales of Suspense was the comic book that Marvel published where Iron Man kind of made his first appearance and was like the star of that book. It wasn't until 1969, I think, that Iron Man had his own kind of solo series. And it was April 1964. So Black Widow's been around for a while, but she was originally a villain. In her first appearance, she didn't even have a costume. She was just like this normal-looking woman with, I think she even had black hair. Like, she didn't even have the red hair she's famous for. And slowly but surely, she made the transition from being a Iron Man villain to being a good guy. That kind of wrote into the story that she defected from the Soviet Union and became part of S.H.I.E.L.D. There was a series called Amazing Adventures that ran for 10 issues and was canceled. And she was kind of like the lead feature in 8 of those 10 issues. After that, she co-led the Daredevil series for 4 years in the 1970s. People who know the comics would know that she's actually one of Matt Murdock / Daredevil's main love interests from the comics. And obviously that was never addressed in the movies or the Daredevil Netflix show because they weren't talking to each other, the production companies, I mean.
It's quite the portfolio before becoming an Avenger.
And I've looked it up. Black Widow as a character has never really had her own kind of ongoing solo series that's lasted for very long.
Although I think, as I recall, she is prominently, or has a fairly prominent role in Hawkeye's series, My Life as a Weapon. No, My Life as a Weapon is the first issue of it, but I think she's in that one a fair amount.
Yeah, she's a big supporting character. Like, she's been a part of a bunch of different superhero teams, including the Defenders and the Avengers and S.H.I.E.L.D. So she's been in a lot of comic books, but in terms of like being the lead character of something, like there's been 8 different attempts in the history of Marvel to give Black Widow her own book, and every time it stops because it isn't selling well.
That does not bode well for this movie.
Well, in the most recent run was just started in 2020, so it's in its second year, so that's probably a good sign. And with the video, I can see you're coughing on a mint, which is unfortunate. But yeah, she's had many small appearances as a supporting character, and she's never really had much time in the spotlight. And like I said earlier, the Ultimate Comics, which is most people know as like kind of like the first major multiverse spin-off line of comics that Marvel did. In that version, they made her one of the founding Avengers because in that version, S.H.I.E.L.D. was much more involved in the creation of the Avengers than they were originally. And that's where like the Samuel L. Jackson version of Nick Fury came from. A lot of things that we know from the MCU kind of come from the Ultimate Comics.
For better or for worse, depending on who you're talking to.
Yeah, and I like honestly see Black Widow's role in the Marvel universe having changed a ton as a result of the movies. And the perfect example I can think of, there was an animated series called Avengers Earth's Mightiest Heroes that debuted in 2010, I think even before Iron Man 2 released. And in that series, Black Widow is not part of the Avengers. She's a supporting character who has like a handful of appearances, and she has like a connection to Hawkeye, but she's never really part of the Avengers team. She's just kind of a random side character. Like I think Wolverine makes more appearances in this show than Black Widow does. But Scarlett Johansson made her debut in Iron Man 2 later that year, and then lo and behold, by 2012, Earth's Mightiest Heroes is canceled, and there's a new Avengers show on called Avengers Assemble, which essentially has the exact same roster as the movies. And so Black Widow is front and center there in the Avengers, and she's drawn in a way that looks like Scarlett Johansson. So they've certainly been making an effort in the time since the movies have come out to kind of upgrade her status, I suppose, which has happened across the board with Marvel comics.
Yeah.
Like they've tried really hard.
It's an interesting thing that I found. Like, I was actually discussing this with a friend recently about one of the major differences between DC and Marvel, and one of them is that like Marvel has made a lot of efforts, especially recently, especially since the MCU kind of became a thing, to have like all of their products converge a lot more around that rather than have a lot of standalone. Whereas DC, for better or for worse, the DCEU sucks at the moment, but it does mean that some other parts of DC aren't catering to that, right? Like you still get the animated DC movies are not catering at all to the DC live action movies, and the TV shows are still pretty separate from it because they haven't gotten that unified. And I feel like it hasn't happened yet, but I think there is a real danger of Marvel kind of unifying itself a bit too much at some point and just only being, catering to the mainstream fans.
Yeah, I think we're getting to the point where perhaps at some point they're like, well, if we make the comic versions like the ones in the movies, maybe we'll get more people reading comics, and then people who have liked the movies will go and buy comics. But I don't think that's be the case. I don't think we're getting a new, swath of comic readers as a result of the movies.
Yeah, not anymore. And I think that's the kind of thing that like the Sam Raimi movies did for Spider-Man, and some of the there was a time where that's what superhero movies did, but I think that time has come and gone, especially with like the TV shows being linked to the Marvel universe and everything else. It's starting to be kind of very much its own thing.
So it's interesting talking about Black Widow having her own movie, because what I was trying to get at is that this is only really happening because she's been part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, because she was like the one female superhero in the roster for a few years, that she's kind of like her status. I mean, most of the MCU characters, now that I think about it, have had their overall status in the world like shot up a ton as a result of the movies.
And I mean, she still has shot up significantly from where she was at, but not necessarily the same way that like Iron Man has gone from a kind of B hero to like he's everywhere now.
Yeah. So when do you think that a Black Widow movie was first set into development, Beeper?
Oh, set into development?
Like, when do you think they started working on a Black Widow movie?
I would say after Civil War.
So production, or rather work on a Black Widow movie, started in 2004.
Oh, wow.
Because Lionsgate bought the rights to Black Widow. Because, again, if you guys will remember from previous conversations we've had, that point in the mid-2000s was when Marvel had sold off all the movie rights to all their characters. And Lionsgate, which was like a small studio at that point, decided to get the rights for Black Widow. And they started working on a script. Apparently David Hayter, who people might know as like the voice of Solid Snake and having worked on some of the early X-Men movies, he actually like wrote a version of the movie. But by 2006, it had gone nowhere, and the rights for a Black Widow movie and essentially the access to the character reverted back to Marvel Studios.
At least we didn't get like a rushed movie to like keep, to hold on to the rights, because that could have severely affected her in the new MCU.
Yeah, and from there, she, like I said, she first appeared in the MCU in Iron Man 2. Her presence there was kind of shoehorned because they're just, trying to set up the world more and set up characters who'd be in the Avengers. She certainly like wasn't my favorite part of that movie. But for whatever reason, I actually really enjoyed her role in like the Avengers. Like she seemed to, I don't know, like I remember that scene she has with Loki where she's like interrogating him, and she actually like gets some information out of him that nobody else could.
Yeah, and that was well set up in the movie with like her previous interrogation when she got called in to go get Bruce Banner. So yeah, she was an interesting character, and I feel like but I feel like she kind of fell by the wayside a little bit, like which is why I said around the time of Civil War, because Civil War also kind of tried to pick her up a little bit as her own character, because I feel like in most, if a lot, if not most of the other movies, she ends up just weirdly being shoot in as either a friend or love interest for another Avenger. Like in the later movies, her role in the movie, I feel, is much more as a friend of Clint Barton's than as her own person. And then in Age of Ultron, they tried to shoehorn a relationship with Bruce Banner, which was laughable, but
Yeah, she's probably one of the most unique characters in the MCU, is that she's been a supporting character in multiple different kind of series. Like she was in the Iron Man movies, the Captain America movies, the Avengers movies, and she was one of the awkward because she was one of the few characters in the Avengers movies that hadn't had their own movies, so she kind of lived as a supporting character.
which again, historically, apparently is what she does, but
yeah, and maybe there isn't anything wrong with that if that's what the character's history is like.
But I feel like there was an opportunity, and I guess we're going to talk about this more later. But there was an opportunity for her to go beyond that, but I don't know if it's as likely anymore.
Kevin Feige, who everyone will know as like the president of Marvel Studios and the main producer of all the MCU movies, he's basically the guy in control. He was quoted in 2014 as saying that they really wanted to explore Natasha Black Widow's story after the events of Age of Ultron, but that the slate of films that they had kind of set out for themselves kind of made it impossible. That they'd kind of committed to this certain set of films to be released that essentially would mean it would be another 4 years plus before they could get to doing a Black Widow movie. And to that I say, Age of Ultron digs into her backstory more, and I feel like that would have, we'll get into when they should have made this movie, but I think there is a missed opportunity that they didn't like put Black Widow in the release schedule and bump something else out for it.
Yeah, I mean, weirdly enough, I'd say it would have made more sense at the time to bump Guardians of the Galaxy out for a Black Widow movie. Though in hindsight, that sounds ridiculous, but at the time, probably wasn't.
Yeah, they were obviously like trying to like put all the pieces in place to establish the Infinity Saga. So, admittedly, like Black Widow having her own movie didn't like funnel that story forward as much. So it wasn't until the final in-person San Diego Comic-Con we had in 2019 that they announced that they're going to be making a Black Widow movie that was set with a release date of May 1st, 2020. And we all know that didn't happen. The movie was delayed 3 times before it was finally released earlier this month, July 2021. We've talked a couple of times on the podcast about how like they waited too long to make the Black Widow movie and that delaying its release didn't help anything. So I think we can skip that here, like just to not repeat ourselves. But
which is funny because I thought of an extra reason why. But
well, go for it. Yeah, if you got more to say.
The extra reason I thought about is like they don't even have the like Stranger Thing hype going anymore, because that it was like if it had been released in 2020, Stranger Things was still pretty popular and people were still like buzzing about it, whereas now nobody talks about Stranger Things anymore because, well, the last season has been delayed and isn't, and like I know it shouldn't be a big deal, but your main actors being in the spotlight does tend to help movies a lot. And
so I know what you're talking about, but for those who maybe don't, why is Stranger Things related to Black Widow?
I forgot the name of the actor.
David Harbour.
Yeah, David Harbour, who's playing the Crimson Typhoon. The Red Guardian, I believe, is his name. Yeah. There was a pre-show quiz at Cineplex, and I think the Crimson Typhoon was one of the things you could have guessed his name to be, and I really should wish it was. But yes, he's one of the main actors in Stranger Things, and also very specifically at the end of the last Stranger Things campaign, spoilers, okay, I'm about to spoil something, ends up being teleported to Russia, and that was such a good setup because it was just so funny that he was in Russia in these two franchises that were completely different.
So at the heart of them delaying Black Widow's release was obviously wanting to make the most money possible, right? Like they did, like there were a handful of people that released movies at the end of August, and then that was basically it until March 2021 when people started opening movies again. So I get it. I get that they delayed it to make more money. But in the end, they still went ahead with the kind of dual release of Disney Plus and theaters. But interestingly, compared to like Mulan or Raya and the Last Dragon or even Cruella, if you watch the trailers or you look at the poster for Black Widow, they don't mention it's on Disney Plus. I think they were really hoping people would actually go to the theaters to watch it.
Well, it's the new MCU movie. It's kind of their bread and butter, and it probably wouldn't bode too well if your new big Marvel movie doesn't do too good in theaters, because that's kind of what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and they kind of made the decision about releasing these movies on Disney Plus like a few months ago, and I guess they can't go back on those decisions once they've made them. So Jungle Cruise, which comes out in 2 weeks from now, is supposed to be the last movie to get the Premier Access Plus theatrical release. Apparently after that, Disney's promised, at least so far, to go back to just releasing new movies in theaters. I paid the $35 for Black Widow because movie theaters weren't going to be open. It turns out that they kind of advanced the opening schedule in Ontario, so they were open. But
technically, you could have seen it on Friday.
Yes, I would have still had to wait a week, which is what I ended up doing anyway, ironically. But whatever, I was able to watch from the comfort of my home. But I'm kind of glad to see this Premier Access thing go away, because it's a lot of money to shell out for a movie just to have it on your streaming service. And like the theater experience, as you can probably attest to from just experiencing it today, it's just a lot better than your home system. I don't care what kind of surround sound you got.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, there were a few times I was not legitimately, but sort of fearing that it would make Mjolnir go into labor, because Quiet Place is quite jump scary. But it is much better than, because we watched the first one last week on our TV, and it is definitely an entirely different experience.
Nonetheless, even though it was available on Disney Plus at the same day it was out in theaters, the movie did gross $80 million its opening weekend, which means it's the highest opening weekend a movie has had in the pandemic.
Really?
It made the most movie of any movie since The Rise of Skywalker, with its 80 million. And Disney put out a press release after the weekend announcing its box office success. And even I find this interesting. You might find it pointless. They actually told the world how much money they made on Disney Plus with Black Widow.
Interesting. No, that is interesting. I don't know if
they've never publicly announced how much money they've made on any of their Premier Access things. We've had statistics on the back end that like show how many people were watching it, which would predict how much it made.
It almost feels like they're trying to justify having done it with the other ones because this time it wasn't a failure. I don't know.
Well, they shouldn't be lying, but according to them, they made $60 million on Disney Plus, almost as much as they made in the theater the opening weekend.
Yeah, that's a fair amount.
And again, for people who might forget this detail, Disney gets to keep 100% of the revenue they make from Disney Plus. They only get like 30, maybe 40% of what's made at the box office because they have to share it with the theaters. So, they made bank, but then its second weekend, it couldn't even stay number one for 2 weeks. It fell to Space Jam. So, I think,
which is a ridiculous notion, but
I'm really excited for that. That's a different conversation. So I think
we inevitably will have.
In the long run, putting it on Disney Plus most likely means that it's not going to do as well at the box office going on from here, because people who might want to see it multiple times will just buy it on Disney Plus instead, or have already done so.
Yeah, I suppose. Or we'll just wait till it's on Disney Plus for free. I feel like that's probably the better strategy at this point. Yeah. I'm looking at the agenda, and it feels like the next part will actually have to be you this time.
Who the hell is that guy?
Taskmaster. He can mimic anyone he's ever seen. He controls their whole army of widows.
He's gotta be stopped.
Lucky us.
I want to break something.
You got fat.
Smelly waterway.
Black Widow, rated PG-13. Tickets and pre-orders available now. Experiencing July 9th.
In a world where Civil War has happened, conveniently, there is a 2-year time period that we don't know much about what Natasha was doing during that time. So we get to see what Natasha was doing for a finite period of that time, which also just conveniently ties into her backstory. And we learn more about where she comes from, and we re-meet people from her life that, for whatever reason, haven't had any involvement in the movies up until now and don't show up in movies that take place after this. But that's okay, because this is a in-between prequel. Like, it's a sequel to Civil War, but it's a prequel to Infinity War. So you can call it an in-between-quel as well. But basically, like, everyone who's seen the Marvel movies knows that Black Widow was part of this program of Russian spy women that was not a good thing, like training essentially young girls to become assassins. And while she's on the run from the government because she wouldn't sign those Sokovia Accords, she's presented with an opportunity to take down the organization that kind of ruined her life.
Hey.
Now you do it en français, because that's what we do in Canada on Blu-rays.
I'm sorely tempted to repeat what you said in French, but I won't do that. Instead, I'll go with the short one. Ce film n'était en aucune façon nécessaire, mais si vous voulez savoir ce que Black Widow faisait entre Civil War et Infinity Wars, voilà.
So Kevin Feige, again, the big guy at Marvel, compares this Black Widow movie to Better Call Saul.
A bold statement.
Because in his eyes, the Black Widow movie is a prequel that can stand on its own as a movie, but it can inform what comes after it.
I mean, does it though? Because a Better Call Saul has several characters from Breaking Bad and sets up major events in the series. I might be a little biased because I personally thought that Better Call Saul was even better than Breaking Bad. So I feel like it's a little of a strong thing, but I understand the concept, and having something that is a standalone can work. But it feels like if it was truly informing future events, then yeah, we would have seen some of these characters appear in other movies.
Yeah, and we'll talk in spoilers about how this does set up future characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
All right.
But after watching the movie, I really think they should have pushed for this to have been released before Avengers Endgame, because spoilers for Avengers Endgame, Black Widow dies in that movie. So having this movie come out after the fact, it just doesn't, it just, like, you're at the very best, it's like a swan song, like giving Scarlett Johansson like one more go around playing the character before she pieces out. And I don't know, if I'm thinking of the movies they released after Civil War, I think this would have been a very natural follow-up to that. So like Doctor Strange was the movie that came out after Civil War, so maybe it would make sense to keep that one where it was, because it was like different from Civil War. But then the next movie they had to come out after that was Guardians Volume 2. And considering that Guardians 2 really didn't advance the Infinity Saga story at all, I would have been very tempted to kind of swap out Guardians 2 for this. And if we decided we needed to have Guardians 2, then I would have swapped out Captain Marvel for this.
Yeah, but they really wanted to have Captain Marvel in Endgame, so they kind of had to.
But they could have. They could have easily just have her show. I feel like, this is my hot take at this point, I feel like they could have had Brie Larson just show up in Avengers Endgame as Captain Marvel after the teaser of the pager, and it would have been fine.
No, you're
considering
right.
for the amount of time she had in the movie.
I mean, especially because that's more or less what they did with Samuel L. Jackson. And then
Yeah.
have the Marvel, like have have the Captain Marvel movie released later because it was a prequel anyway. And it was going to
Right?
be a late prequel anyway. Yeah, no, I think that might have been the optimal thing to do because people did still care more, and it was before she, spoiler, dies in Infinity Wars and in
Endgame.
Endgame. Yeah, and I think it would have been. You're right, probably a better, and it's closer to chronologically where it would have been, which I think is also like it would have made it because I think that is like it would have made it not a flashback. It would have made it kind of fit in more or less where it was, right?
I mean, if they had gone with the swapping it a Guardians 2, then it could have been told in real time. But if they'd gone with putting it when Captain Marvel came out, it would still be like a flashback because Infinity War would have come out by then. We just wouldn't have gotten
Right.
into it.
Yeah. But it still wouldn't have been that crazy.
Yeah. In the end, I do think this was the right setting for the film, like having it take place after Civil War when again she's on the run and the Avengers are all kind of split up. I think that was a good decision in terms of like story wise, because like a prequel that was literally just entirely set in the past and shows her like before she joined Shield, I maybe that would make for a good Disney Plus show, but I don't know if I would necessarily be as interested in seeing that as a movie.
Yeah, I think I mean, yeah, it could have been an interesting to see how she ended up joining with Shield, but again, you're right, that would be more of a series, and that would feel even more out of place, I feel, right now, because you'd also be getting, flashback Samuel L. Jackson, which wasn't great in Captain Marvel, and
It wasn't that bad.
No, but people didn't enjoy it very much either.
I was kind of struck when I was watching it though, because the movie opens with like the credits, like as the movie's playing, you see starring so and so, written by so and so, and I was like, I don't think I've seen this before in a Marvel movie. This just feels like a regular movie kind of thing. Usually, you don't see any of those credits pop up till the end, and it kind of threw me for a loop. I was like, oh, like is this something new they're doing in Phase 4? Is it just a minute detail that the specific director chose? Am I overthinking this?
I mean, I don't know the answer, but I feel like if it is something that the director chose, then that's probably a good sign because, I mean, obviously not as much as Warner Brothers with the DC movies, but Disney and Marvel have been having trouble with trying to strong arm directors into doing certain things, and that was something that people had concerns about. So if it's not a concern anymore, I think that's probably good. Again, what I said earlier about Marvel kind of becoming a little stale and unified as a whole. I feel like even the movies kind of have started to feel like just another Marvel movie, and honestly, like I can say that after the Loki TV show, I'm kind of getting a bit of the Marvel fatigue I once had, where a lot of these things seem to not be as original.
Well, I will say this, the action in this movie, at least for the first half plus, it's very, I would say, visceral. Like people get hit or they get banged into something and you're like, oh, like you can feel the impact of the fighting, which is good when like you're seeing people fight on screen. Like it doesn't feel, I don't know, overly rehearsed, or like it doesn't feel like they're dancing with each other. It feels like they're actually like trying to like kill each other. This did admittedly make me ask the question, like, does Black Widow actually like have some kind of superpowers? Because she just she has like action movie powers now. It's like she just gets up from things that like that would have killed someone or that would have broken some bones. Or, and I know like it's a superhero movie and like there's all this sci-fi stuff going on,
but at the same time, there is a super soldier in this movie.
Exactly, and that's you understand. I'm just like, she's supposed to be the one who doesn't have superpowers, and yet you're having her get up from things that would like kill a normal person, and they never really explain if she has some kind of enhanced healing or whatever. It just sort of like took me out of the movie a couple times, and I felt enough about it that I had to write it down.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, but it's always a tough one. It's the Batman syndrome. If a character who doesn't have superpowers gets popular enough, then he effectively has superpowers.
No, it did. This movie did feel a lot like Civil War in a good way, to like even the point of like locations that they're going to like pop up on the screen in big white font. And
If you enjoy that kind of thing,
it brought back good memories for me because like
that's good.
I love Civil War, and yeah, the elements of that, the globe trotting kind of espionage.
I feel like Snowy Owl did that too a little bit.
Yeah, probably. So it definitely has that feel. Like if you're thinking of like kinds of Marvel movies, it feels like that. And I imagine people who are fans of like Black Widow comic books and some of the characters from the comics that are in this movie will not enjoy this because they are very loose adaptations of the characters, to the point like there's one in particular we need to discuss in the spoilers. But again, at this point, I don't think they're trying to appeal to the hardcore fans with the movies. They're trying to appeal to a wider audience. So to the point of, I would almost go as far as saying like they're alienating certain fans by intentionally like adapting the characters in unconventional ways. Like there's a character in this that is misrepresented on the level that you feel Ultron was misrepresented in Age of Ultron.
Oh, that bad.
But having said that, the characters they do create for this movie are very interesting. There's a younger Black Widow named Yelena who is in the movie. She's a lot of fun. We've talked about David Harbour. He's also very fun. And I'm going to mention My Little Pony here. This is just there's a sequence in the movie that's set in 1995. And there were two kind of things that showed up on screen that I was like, that's not possible. One, it's 1995 and you see children watching DuckTales. And I'm like, by 1995, DuckTales was off the air and other shows like Darkwing Duck and Goof Troop were on it, replacing it. So I found it hard to believe that children were still watching DuckTales by 1995. If you were a child in 1995 and were watching DuckTales, please let us know. Prove me wrong. Number two, at one point you see a little girl holding a My Little Pony character, but it is clearly Twilight Sparkle from Generation 4 of My Little Pony, which did not exist in 1995. I think at best they were at Generation 2 in 1995. So I'm sure no one cares about these little nitpicks, but it's like anachronisms are a thing. People get upset about, people wearing the wrong shoes or watches in historical movies. So I'm like, here's a toy that is out of place.
I have no problem with the My Little Pony one. Were they in Russia when they were watching DuckTales? Because that could explain why it was a few years behind.
Russia. They were in the United States.
Then yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's an outrage.
I also think there's a drinking game to be had with this movie because, boy, oh boy, do they like to reference the fact that Natasha is an Avenger.
Oh, I see.
I like have a bottle of vodka on hand. If you're watching this at home with Disney Plus, I don't encourage sneaking vodka into the theaters if you go see it there. But they make reference to the fact that she's an Avenger a lot. And it's like, oh, where's your buddy Captain America? Where's your friend Iron Man? Like, it was just like, okay, we get it. She's an Avenger.
It's strange that they would still have that, given that they specifically made the setting after Sokovia when she's on the run.
Well, and I get it. She's like, I understand it to a certain extent. Like she's connecting with people she hasn't seen since before she joined the Avengers. So like naturally that's going to be a topic of conversation, but it just, the amount of times it was brought up, it was like as if I was like, yes, me and the audience understand she's an Avenger. I've seen all the movies with her and you don't have to remind me.
Especially considering when it is now too.
Yeah. But on the whole, before we get into spoilers, like it was an enjoyable movie. I feel like I've nitpicked a lot, but it was worth a watch. I do regret buying it on Disney Plus though, because if I had just waited a little longer, I could have just watched it in theaters and paid a lot less. But aside from that, Beeper, do you have any non-spoilery questions before we dive into the spoilerverse?
Nah, I think I will get into the spoilerverse.
All right. So there'll be a time code in the description where you can skip around the spoilers. We're inside the spoilerverse right now. Spoilers. First of all, okay, so they include William Hurt in the cast of this movie. Like, it's like they're showing all the names of the actors and it says, and William Hurt. And I'm like, oh, great. General Ross or, Secretary Ross is going to have a big role in the movie. He's in one scene where he talks, and then there's another scene at the end where you see him, but he doesn't say anything. And I'm like, how does that count That's like a cameo. Like, why do you tease us by like listing him in part of the main cast when he's barely in the movie?
Because they didn't believe in this movie's ability to bring people in alone. I don't know. Although that would be weird, because if the credits are at the beginning of the movie, then you don't really... It wasn't like something that was given beforehand either.
I don't know if it's because of like his availability or something, but it would have made total sense. Like, that's kind of the role he had in the Incredible Hulk. He was like chasing, someone the whole time. So I feel like they could have used him more, but in the end, it was basically like a giant cameo. Like, I feel like Nick Fury has more screen time in Iron Man 2 than Ross has in this one.
I mean, I think that's the Iron Man movie he has the most screen time, but it's still not much. You're right.
The biggest thing, I don't know if you've seen this online, Beep, or people have kind of taken issue with, is the handling of Taskmaster as a character.
Oh, Taskmaster is in this movie.
Well, a version of Taskmaster is in this movie.
Something called Taskmaster is in this movie.
And for the most part, up until the end, it seems like it is Taskmaster from the comics, who is this character who can essentially copy other people's abilities once he's observed them. And that makes him a very dangerous combatant.
Yeah.
But there's a twist here. And at this point, I guess we should be used to this with the Marvel movies, because they've done it a couple times now. They did it with the Mandarin in Iron Man 3. They did it with the Skrulls in Captain Marvel, where they are leading you up to saying, oh, like, this is a comics accurate version of this character. And then they kind of go, nope.
Okay.
So here's what happens. Okay. So it's set up in the movie. They explain that before Black Widow joined S.H.I.E.L.D., she killed the daughter of the man who created the Black Widow program. And she did this in an attempt to try and kill the man who created the Black Widow program. And up until this point, she's under the impression she had killed this dude because she blew up the building he was in, but turns out he survived. And that's kind of like part of the red in her ledger, is that she's gone all these years, like, having killed this child just for the sake of getting to her father.
Okay.
So in the spirit of Mask of the Phantasm, we discover that Taskmaster is actually the little girl that she supposedly killed, grown up, cybernetically advanced to essentially be Taskmaster. So Taskmaster is not a man, even though he's like, you can clearly see like the suit she's wearing. Like, it's obviously like designed to make it look like she's a dude. So they kind of tease us the whole movie thinking, oh yeah, this is the Taskmaster from the comics. This is this specific character. And then they go, nope, it's a female character, totally different story, totally different origin. And instead of being like, she's essentially like a drone, like a robot, basically, because she's like, just does whatever her father tells her to do.
That's unfortunate. And yeah, especially because Taskmaster is the opposite of somebody being used by other people. He's like, he is the one who uses or who trains and like creates other villains. Like, that is kind of a sad. But is he meant to be the main antagonist then?
Not really, because they kind of portray like the guy who created the Black Widow program as the main antagonist, and that like Taskmaster is kind of like a lieutenant that's sort of like sent to get rid of Natasha.
Okay. Which is also kind of strange.
Now, I've heard some people comment that, like, well, this doesn't necessarily mean that, like, they can't have the actual Taskmaster show up later. Kind of like what they're doing with the Mandarin, essentially. Like, there's nothing stopping somebody else from using that name and that, skill set later on.
Yeah. Although for the Mandarin, it's a little bit ruined, because unless it's Ben Kingsley who becomes what he was acting out, like, how are you going to have him look like that?
Well, you clearly haven't seen the Shang-Chi trailers, but...
Oh. No, I have not, so...
yes, the Mandarin is a character in that.
Oh, great. That'll be interesting how they finagle it. But I guess it's... But I feel like it would be a lot easier if, like, they did something like the reverse of what they did with Zemo in Snowy Owl, like have him wear the mask in the first movie, and then later on, well, he can be whoever. Or like, because I feel like, at least for Taskmaster, like, she's wearing the mask and the suit, so you could,
It's a
it's a
real
lot
Samus
easier.
situation.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to have somebody take up the persona, you
Yeah.
know,
And
kind of
I'm
like
not
Iron Man could be anybody in the Iron Man suit. It wouldn't really matter, but like in the same way, Taskmaster, anybody who wears a mask like that or who pilots the drone or whatever could be the Taskmaster.
Yes, I'm not a fan of the Taskmaster character, so it didn't bother me, this particular reveal. But I can imagine, like, if I was a fan of the character, it would have bothered me. And also, you know, it's like the reveal doesn't really leave much of an impact on Natasha. Like the fact that, like, oh, like this person I thought I killed has actually like come back to haunt me. It just sort of moves on to the next bit of the story very quickly, so you don't really get much time to sit with that. And then it sort of resolves itself in a way that, you know, Natasha can be guilt free of trying to kill this person. So it,
I love it when you set up emotional baggage, then make it so that it isn't actual emotional baggage. It's a strange choice. I feel like it's especially a strange choice given what Natasha's character development was in Endgame and to a certain extent Infinity Wars as well, because she kind of like even in Age of Ultron, she kind of leans into this I'm a monster, I've done terrible things. And she still kind of has that feeling later on that she is trying to amend for her past. But if you make it so that she confronts her past and is free of guilt from it, then what's the point of her still being an Avenger? Like, you know, like, yes, she's fighting for her friends and the fate of the world, but it's not, it retroactively changes her motivation to weaken her character.
yeah, and this is where I would say why this movie is good and not great, because there is like another element where they introduce something very heavy and then it kind of gets kind of like resolved very quickly. I mean, basically, you discover that for a period of time, she was like undercover in Russia with these like these parents and this sister who were all like undercover for Russia, and then they get essentially when they leave America, the two children get recruited into the Black Widow program, and the younger sister is this new character Yelena with the blonde hair, who you might have seen in the trailers, who is a different Black Widow from the comic books. And a lot of this movie is clearly trying to set up her as the next Black Widow and kind of like passing on the torch from Scarlett Johansson to Florence Pugh, I think is how you say her last name. So, and she's fun. She's a great character. Like, she'll do well in the movies. She was a great addition. But the mother and like the father is, of course, Red Guardian in this situation. So, like, that's how he factors into the movie. The mother character, it's revealed that she was the creator of essentially the computer program that allows the Black Widow program to exist, that essentially allows for like the mind control that all the girls get put through.
Interesting.
And it's you see her like temporarily like feel guilty about it, and you hear from like both Natasha and Yelena how they feel like their lives were screwed up because all this stuff happened to them. And then all of a sudden, on like the turn of a dime, the mother character kind of decides to help them take down the evil Black Widow man.
Yeah, that's unfortunate because I feel like that's also a wasted opportunity for the style and type of movie this could have been. Like, there aren't that many pieces of media that do kind of a deep dive into psychological manipulation, especially like experimentation on children. It's something that's like often touched upon, but I only know personally know one piece of media that really does a deep dive into it. It's the manga Monster by Naoki Urasawa, and it does, and that one does happen during the Cold War, because there were weird experimentations going on in many parts of what was the USSR or stopped being the USSR, and I feel like it's a wasted opportunity, and it's also kind of sad that, like, I don't know, I feel like the only reason this movie existed was to give more character development, and if it doesn't actually give it, then what was the point of the movie?
To set up the next Black Widow, because this actor's
Well, yeah,
contract is up.
But you could have done that in different ways. You could have had her origin story as a Black Widow in which Scarlett Johansson is a cameo instead of being the main character. And I feel like that would have been a more organic way to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing, like this movie kind of like shoehorns it by the end of this movie, they've basically like killed the Black Widow program. The guy who behind it is dead, and all the people who were Black Widows are essentially like set free from their mind control, and Yelena's kind of given the mission to go and like find all the rest and kind of like wake them up. So it does, in a sense, like bring like what you were talking about earlier, like kind of like helping Natasha's character kind of come around to the point that she's like more at peace with her history. And this movie provides the origin of the vest that she was wearing in Infinity War, because Yelena is wearing it for most of the movie, and like the last scene they're in, she like takes it off and passes it on to Natasha. And I was like, I feel like, and they were making jokes about this, like, oh, this vest is great, it has so many pockets, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's the vest she was wearing in Infinity War.
Yeah,
sure enough,
that makes sense. Although, but now that you mention it, if her father is a super soldier, then it is possible that genetically she has some, because
she's not, it's not his actual father. This was this whole.
Oh, it was the family. It wasn't actually her father. Okay, I
they
thought
were posing as a family.
Oh, I thought it was her family, and then after that, she got recruited into the Black Widow program.
No, yeah,
that's okay. I misunderstood what you were going, because then it could be justifiable, because we have seen examples of the super serum seeping into the genetics of future generations.
Yeah, not quite that sophisticated. You do get the origin of the Budapest story in this, and it's kind of underwhelming, because it's basically like the time they killed or supposedly killed the man behind the Black Widow program and his daughter, which ended up not being the case.
Okay. Does that mean that? But that means that we do get a cameo from Hawkeye?
An audio cameo. You hear his voice over the radio. Apparently they didn't want to actually like have any of the other Avengers like show up in the movie, because they wanted it to be like her movie.
Yeah, but it feels kind of bad, because like that's more or less the treatment Hawkeye got in the Thor movie as well. Or it was just like, yeah, he's there, guys, totally, but you never really see him do anything. I mean, you do see him in Thor, but like very little.
Speaking of Hawkeye, the post-credit scene for this film essentially provides setup for the Hawkeye series, which is coming to Disney Plus. Basically, it flashes forward to post Endgame, and Yelena comes across Natasha's gravestone, and she's sad and mourning, whatever. And then Julia Louis-Dreyfus from Snowy Owl rolls in and basically says, "Would you like to kill the man who's responsible for Natasha's death?" And then shows her a photo of Hawkeye.
Wow. Okay. Sure.
I think it's interesting, because like they had confirmed a while ago that Florence Pugh would be reprising her role in the Hawkeye series. We just didn't know like what the circumstances were going to be. So I mean, I can see it. It's like, technically, if you're going to blame someone for Natasha's death, that you could blame Clint, because he didn't kill himself faster than she killed herself.
Yeah, that's a pretty big, this is a pretty big stretch of what actually happened to say he is responsible for her death. Because, I mean, you could argue that whoever made the teams, aka Captain America, sent the two suicidal people to the place where somebody needs to die. Like, it's much more his fault than anybody else.
Right, that is a good point. Apparently, this was supposed to be the first... dropped my water bottle, but nothing is broken. This was supposed to be the first appearance of Julia Louis-Dreyfus's character in the MCU, but obviously because the movie was delayed, they had to like rush to film scenes for her in Falcon and Winter Soldier. Because if you recall, she shows up there.
Yeah. Okay.
And the rumor is that like she's recruiting the Dark Avengers, so she's slowly like building up her team of essentially her version of the Avengers. So she's got her own Captain America now. She's got her own Black Widow now.
Yeah, that's not bad.
But you're not excited to see the Hawkeye series now, knowing that Yelena's going to come after him?
I was never excited to see the Hawkeye movie. I didn't even know it was going to happen, and I don't know. I'm hitting Marvel fatigue again, so I don't know if I will be able to truly enjoy a lot of these things. But who knows? If I watch enough anime in between, maybe I will.
So coming around to final thoughts, I enjoyed Black Widow. I think the ideal time for it to have come out would have been between Infinity War and Endgame. particularly because the post-credit scene, if it had come out between those two movies, again, we're outside the spoilerverse now, so I won't say what happens, but if you know what happens in the Black Widow post-credit scene, that would have created a lot of extra interest in Avengers Endgame, because they would have been like, what? What does this mean? Now I'm even more confused about what's happening. But they didn't. And like, we can't cry over spilled milk. They put this movie into production too late, so there's a lot less interest. I think at this point, people just want to see Marvel movies again. And the only thing that's really keeping me from rating it higher is that ultimately there are some kind of narrative points where they kind of drop the ball, in my opinion. So I'll give Black Widow 3 out of 4 bat cookies.
Having not seen it yet, I shall reserve my judgment, but I will say it saddens me to hear the potential of this movie, because I feel like Marvel have been pretty good at not wasting potential for a lot of their movies. And so it doesn't bode well, I feel, for the direction they're trying to do when they do waste potential. And I think we probably will talk about that more next week too.
Speaking of next week, oh wait, let me just get before I get ahead of myself. Black Widow is now available on Disney Plus for Premier Access, or it is in theaters, which are mostly opened up now. So if you have not seen it yet, go see it. At the very least, even though it doesn't obviously feed into the narrative of Phase 4 very much, it's still a great kind of swan song, as I said, for Black Widow as a character, specifically Natasha Romanoff.
And I mean, ScarJo getting what she probably deserves for the work she has put in as a supporting character in the MCU.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
So this is normally when we go into the Bat Jar and pull our topic for next time, but Loki has just ended, the third of the Marvel Disney Plus series, and you're dancing, so does that mean you're excited or sad? Or
I don't know. I'm a little indifferent, to be honest. But
that bodes well.
Yeah, I have far less opinions on this one than I did about the other two, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think we'll get into that next week. There are reasons why I am less opinionated about it, I think.
Fair enough. So all of Loki all 6 episodes have aired on Disney Plus. So if you want to do your homework before next week's episode, go binge them, because we are indeed talking about Loki next time. It's probably going to get a little mischievous around here. Some tricks will perhaps happen, and we will serve our glorious purpose.
And maybe multiple of us will show up.
Oh no. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
And I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch you on the flip side.
And I'm Beef Pork Bacon.